all these things. That's who I say I am. But it's really how you make people feel. So it's actually a feeling, right? It's when you come in contact with someone, whether online or offline, what you leave them with, how you show up, how does your presence, how does your email, how does your resume show up in a way that makes them feel something. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to leave some questions for the end, so feel free as I begin to present to put them in the chat. We'll capture them and we'll go through them later on today. So one of the things that I learned was truly around what makes up a brand. I didn't know this a few years ago, 8 years ago, when I started this journey for myself. But I learned that there's key elements to a brand, namely your mission. So your brand has to have a mission. It can't just exist for no reason. It has to know where it's going to go, who it's going for, what is the end goal of that brand. It has to have attributes, right? Specific attributes. When you think about people, influencers, actors, politicians, these people have a look, they have a tone, they have a presence that targets with specific attributes. They always look the same or sound the same. They have branded themselves a certain way. And so you expect them to always show up that way. Those are attributes, right? They have a character. So again, back to the attributes, they define themselves in the story, right? Who am I in my own story? Am I the hero of my story? Am I the enabler in my story? Am I an emerging leader? Those are things you get to decide. It has a story, right? I mean, clearly you have a story. Perhaps you haven't thought about your story as your brand story. Perhaps you've been living your life up until now saying, one day I was born, stuff happened to me, went to school, whatever. That was me. I knew I had a story, but I didn't know what my story was about, right? And it has SEO. So basically, when you have a digital presence, today's resume is your digital presence. Employers are looking not only at your LinkedIn, they're looking at other channels to see what you're about because it tells them the story. It completes the story for them in their head. What do you like? Where do you live? What things do you talk about? What are you passionate about? What is your lived experience? Those are SEO points, data points that help people understand kind of the complete picture. Because clearly your resume just kind of shows your highlights, right? The good points. But we know very well that what makes us up is a whole lot more than that. So today we're going to talk about these things. And I started this journey, as I said, 8 years ago. And this is the first picture of me at Microsoft. August 2012, when I came in, Microsoft called me one day and said, hey, come work for us. And I said, sure, I will. I was so excited. I think you can tell from my picture. I was just elated to be at this great company. I came from the slums of Caracas, Venezuela, and never would I imagine I could work for a company like Microsoft. Never. And so I started my week there. I was so excited, but it only lasted only a few days. Because after I came in, I started getting bullied by 4 women that were older than me that had been there for a long time. And my excitement wore off. I spent the next year suffering under this bullying by these women. I didn't know that I belonged there. I felt like I didn't belong. It was clear to me that I just was not someone who should be there, who had earned my way to Microsoft. I felt imposter syndrome every day. I was just not someone who felt proud to be myself. And that's, that just got worse for me. Every day it just got worse. And I remember coming to the office one day, and I was already kind of getting tired, and I showed up and 2 of these women did something to me, and I was done. I grabbed my laptop and I said, I quit. And so I was walking out, and a PM a man grabbed my arm and he says, you're not going anywhere. You need to stay. And I was like, why would I need to stay? I don't need to stay. Nobody wants me here. And he goes, no, you need to stay. He goes, go home, sleep on it, come back tomorrow. So I did. I went home and I asked myself, why would I come back? Why would I come back? This person that you see here was completely lost. I had no purpose. I had no purpose. In this picture is someone who just lived their lives, didn't know, had gone to school, had gotten a job, inconsequential. I didn't know why I would give myself a purpose to exist. I had a mix of attributes at that point. I sometimes was kind, sometimes was not kind. I was sarcastic. I was many different things. I hadn't thought of myself as someone who can own her own attributes to show the world who I wanted to be. I had no character definition, right? Again, I didn't know who I was and who I was in my own story. In this particular moment, when people were basically bullying me, I didn't know who I was in my own story. I was probably a victim at that point, and I didn't even own it. I had no story, right? I was born one day, and that's it. Up until that moment, I was living inconsequentially. And if you Googled me, you'll probably just find my postal address or my parents. That's it. That's all you would find. So this person here who was getting bullied, who went home that day, went home and understood all these things and said, wow, if I came back the next day, why would I come back? Who am I in this story? Why would I be back? And that's what began my journey in personal branding. I decided to give myself a mission, and I wrote this statement for myself. And this is what I want to share with you today. Very simple and still works. I use it all the time. I gave my brand a purpose. I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go out there. I'm going to give myself some attributes. I'm going to find out what the world needs that I can help with. And I'm going to leave a legacy, right? Because I learned that I needed to do something for a purpose. I couldn't just come back to Microsoft for no reason, right? Just to get paid. That's not what I wanted to do. So I decided, based on my own experience, my own story, to come back. And to come back to talk about my experience, because I figured if I was being bullied, probably there were other people, other women, possibly younger than me. I was in my 30s, maybe in their 20s, getting bullied as well. So at that moment, I decided to think about my brand. But the problem was, I didn't know who I was. So I decided to create a baseline. I was like, well, how do I show up right now? What is my brand right now? Your brand is how you make people feel. So what you've created up until this point, whether you've done it intentionally or not, is what people have labeled you as. You already have a brand. Even if you haven't created one for yourself, you already have a brand. When you go into a room, people are already branding you. They're saying this person's about this, is about that. The way you dress, the way you show up, the way you speak, the way you do your hair, that's all branding. And if you haven't been intentional about it, it doesn't matter. You still have a brand. So what I did was I asked myself one question. What are my attributes, right? What are my overarching attributes? How do I show up? And you may say, well, Miri, why only 2? Well, 2, because for me at the moment, that's all I could remember. I mean, you could have 20, right? But for me, I just thought of 2 big attributes that would brand me, where I could ask myself, and it would act as a kind of thermometer where I would say, I'm blank and blank. Hey, is my email blank and blank? Is the way I dress blank and blank? Is the way I send a tweet blank and blank, right? So all these things basically resonated with me at one big label of who I was going to be. But because I didn't know who I was, I asked the question to many people, how do I show up? Now, back then, we didn't have social media. We didn't have, I know I'm old. We didn't have, surveys, online surveys. So I literally went person by person asking, hey, how do I show up? A big question, a big open-ended question. But people answered it, right? People answer. So I ask you today, if you have not taken the time to understand what your brand is right now, your baseline, go ahead and do that. You can do this with people that you care about, that care about you, mentors, teachers, friends, colleagues, family members, people that you respect and know that they want to see you win, right? Ask them that one question, open-ended, and say, hey, I took this personal branding thing, and I want to know where I stand right now, my baseline. Where do I go from here? So how do I show up? And you're going to get a lot of answers. People are going to give you candid answers, hopefully. I got a lot of candid answers. And that became my data points, right? That became my kind of my storyline, my starting point. I got a lot of answers and themes out of that, and I categorized them. And 2 attributes came up for me that were really interesting. The first one was sarcastic. I showed up sarcastic, right? The second one was feminist. And I thought, well, those are not good or bad. They're just attributes, right? That's how people see me. That's how I show up. But for me, when I decided to go back to Microsoft the next day, and I targeted these young women, I realized these 2 attributes would not land well with them. So being sarcastic would show up authoritative, right? My cohort, who I was targeting, my audience, was going to be younger women in tech here in America, and sarcasm doesn't land well with them. It shows up too authoritative. So I needed to kind of level that off. The second thing was the feminist. And you would say, well, Miri, it's a great thing. Like, feminism is a good thing. We want equality. You're right. I was born a feminist in my own estimation. My mom, we were born in the slums of Caracas, Venezuela. So of course we had to fend for ourselves. We had to be, just self-sufficient and self-dependent. But then I realized I got married and I had 2 boys. And I realized that wasn't, here in the States, feminism shows up as extremist. right? It shows up way out there sometimes. It could be misconstrued as even men bashing. And I didn't want to show up like that, right? I wanted to show up that I was community-based, that we need each other. I'm not so self-dependent. I can't be. Success is a team sport. I didn't get here alone. So I kind of used that word feminist and I brought it down a little bit to feminine. So I went out with 2 attributes based on that baseline that I had created, that people had given me that feedback. I used I am kind, so I changed sarcasm. I am kind and I am feminine. So you see how these things start to work. You create a baseline and you say, wow, these attributes that I have, that I am today, can I use them? Are they great? Can I modify them? Can I aspire to something else for my audience? But you do have to have an audience. So that's where this comes in, right? The world needs. Who is the world? Well, the world's a big place. There's a lot of people in the world. It's 8 billion people. Can you target 8 billion people? Possibly not. You probably shouldn't either. Think again about those people on TV, on those influencers on social media. They target a certain audience. They only target a certain audience. That's really important when you brand yourself. You see corporate branding, I do marketing. They only target a certain audience. So you can have a hybrid audience, but the more targeted your audience is going to be, the more purposeful your brand is. So I beg you to start thinking, who can I target? What is my story? Who can I help? Could it be IT pros? Could it be young women in tech, young men in tech? Could it be younger audiences like children? Could be older audiences. I don't know. You get to decide, and you get to decide your why as well. And this is where storytelling helps us. Because if you're like, Miri, that sounds good, but I don't even know where to start. I didn't even know where to start either, so that's good, right? We're going to start this whole thing together. Storytelling helps us with the data points that we need. And this is where your origin story is really important. So what I want you to do and think about is, if you grab a piece of paper, this is homework, or you could do it right now as you watch. Grab a blank piece of paper, here's mine, and you're going to create a set of data points based on your origin story. Basically, you're gonna have a piece of paper, grab a pen, and put a dot somewhere on the left side of that paper. Here's mine, right? And that's gonna be the day you were born. That's it. I know I'm old, 1978. But you're gonna put that dot there on the piece of paper. It could be really high up, like it was a great day when you were born. It could be like way low, maybe, I don't know your birth story. Maybe it wasn't a great story. Mine's right in the middle because I actually was born right after my older sister. I'm the middle child. That's never a good thing. And so then soon after my little sister was born, and I just kind of got stuck in the middle. It wasn't a great day, but it was an okay day. So the day I was born was kind of flatlined. And then you're gonna start from your birthday to the next kind of big memory that you remember. Maybe you were 3, 4, I don't know what it is, or a big event that happened that you're like, hey, this kind of marked my life. And you're gonna do this all the way through the present. I'm not gonna go through my whole life. I'm just gonna give you an example of what this might look like. For me, big data points here. I got married in 1998, graduated in 96. So it's gonna kind of look like this, right? You're gonna kind of peaks and valleys of your origin story. Up until now, you have not, thought about this like this, or possibly have not thought about these data points as actually part of your story. But your brain has captured this. Your brain goes back into that kind of that encoded memory and has those points there. And this serves for you to create your story. And this is what differentiates you. Because I can put on my resume, I graduated from the school. That's it. But my story tells something different. My story tells I came from the slums. My story tells that I had to learn to speak the language. My story tells that my parents couldn't pay for my school, so I had to earn a scholarship to go to school, right? With my sisters, because we were very poor. So all these things you can't put on a resume, but you can understand it, how it comes together with your data points. That becomes your brand. That is what differentiates you. Because on paper, everybody graduated school, but you graduated differently. Did your parents have to work, 3 jobs to get you to school? I don't know that. You know that. Your story knows that. So we're going to start with this data point and understand how storytelling helps us. And at the time that I became a storyteller, I didn't even know what that was. In fact, I had to go ask people who call themselves storytellers. right? I went to Disney, Coca-Cola. I asked Google, Hyatt, Marriott. I asked a lot of people that call themselves storytellers in this field, producers, writers, TV personalities, authors. And I didn't ask them what is storytelling. I asked them what is not. And I got a lot of answers from that because I didn't find a good definition of this online. Right? I was like, a lot of people were talking about storytelling, and I was like, what is it? And I was going to go do this job at Microsoft as a storyteller, and I didn't know what it was. In fact, I was called to do the job of storyteller in data and AI at Microsoft. No idea what I was going to do, right? Fail, fail, fail. So I did this homework, and I got
Hello. Miri, you've, yeah, please unmute yourself.
oh, I think someone must have muted me because I didn't mute myself. All right.
Yes. Yeah,
Thank
all
you.
right. Sorry for that. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back. So I don't know where I left off, so I'm going to pick it back up on what is not storytelling, if that's okay with you. Yes?
Yeah, that's fine for us.
Excellent. So no, storytelling isn't all those facts and data. It's not those opinions about people, about you. It's not the data points of your origin story. That just helps you tell the story, right? It's not marketing and it's not exploitation. I thought that was a really good answer from people. It's definitely not going on Instagram and calling yourself a storyteller because you put your story out there. And if it's not that, then what is it, right? Again, I had to kind of define my own definition because I just couldn't find one that made sense for me. So this is what I came up with. This storytelling is the emotional transfer of those data points, of your origin story, of your resume, of those assertions, those opinions that people have about you. It's an emotionally driven transfer from person to person. And it's done through a character, a plot, and a conclusion, right? The basic elements of story. In fact, a story is only a story if it's deemed through a character, plot, and conclusion. But we don't want to be boring storytellers. We don't want our story to be boring just to have a character, plot, and conclusion. A real good one is emotional. It draws people to you. And again, it makes, that's the word feeling, right? It makes people feel something when they come in contact with your brand, with your story. How does this apply to your brand? Well, I realized at my work that I didn't know how to tell stories, how to create stories in the way that they were going to be emotional. So at the time I was taking my master's course and I was doing a certification for design thinking. This, if you don't know, it's actually the model of design thinking. It's a 5-step approach. And I realized, wow, this actually begins with empathy and it ends with empathy. It's a cycle. And I was really drawn back. I was like, how does this work? I asked my professor, can you prototype stories? And he's like, you can prototype whatever you want. So I decided to prototype stories. And I want to share this with you so you can prototype your own brand story. But it does begin with empathy. And at the time, I didn't know what that was. You know, what does that mean? Empathize with what? Empathize with people. Empathize with yourself. Empathize with your audience. Empathize with your target audience. And I didn't know how that played into me. I didn't even know what empathy was. So I went and researched again. And I didn't get a lot of good answers for empathies, but I found this one that I really liked. This is from Psychology Today. It says that empathy is the experience of understanding another person's thoughts, another person's voice, another person's lived experience. And it's really not about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's about walking a whole lot in their shoes to understand, right? How does this apply? If I targeted these young women that were in their 20s, I was no longer in my 20s. But I understood them from their perspective because I had been 20. And I knew that if I had been bullied at 30 and they were getting bullied at 20, it was probably bigger for them. It was probably harder for them. They were probably suffering a whole lot more, right? So it was a different perspective that I had. I learned that there are 3 levels of empathy. One is cognitive empathy. It's understanding that the people that I was talking to or targeting are human. And for that reason alone, it was no longer Miri to them. It was no longer me to them. It was like, hey, they have things that they're going through. We all do, right? When I brand myself, when I send a resume, I'm not just sending a resume to a corporation. Some human is receiving that piece of information. How do I transfer that in a way that it's going to get to them? How do I position myself in a way that another human is reading my LinkedIn profile? That is what good branding is. That's what empathetic branding is, right? And it's really, like, this is an example of cognitive empathy. Asking yourself, hey, how is someone with COVID feeling right now? Right about now. Getting away from our tunnel vision, right? And not thinking about how I'm feeling through COVID, but someone who's actually right now dealing with this illness. How are they physically and emotionally, right? It moves us away, zooms out, and now we look at the big picture. That is cognitive empathy. Then we think about emotional empathy. This is the idea that we are human. That allows me to be a little more vulnerable. A lot of you may be thinking, are you kidding, Miri? I'm not going to share my story. I can't do that. Do you know how many failures? Yes, I have a ton of failures. You know how embarrassing that is? Nobody's going to like it. Why nobody's going to be interested? Believe me, they will. Because what happens is when I throw out my story, somebody goes, wow, Miri, I went to something similar. I get that all the time. Hey, Miri, that happened to me too. Or I failed like that too. And we get connected in our humanity. It's really this idea that what I do affects someone else. At the individual level, we are all one. And what I do does affect someone. And if we put it out there, it's even more impactful. It's even more poignant. And the last level of empathy is compassionate empathy, is really thinking about me in a way that I am being compassionate with myself, empathetic to myself, and I'm allowing my own emotions to be acknowledged. It's the idea that I'm thinking, oh, sorry, something. It's the idea that, you know, I'm not changing anything about myself as a human. I'm more acknowledging that I am a human. I'm checking in with myself and saying, I feel like this today. That's it. Acknowledging my own feelings. The way this plays out in storytelling, in designing your own story, is that when you realize they're human, we're human, I'm human, there is a thing called the universal truth. It's a feeling, right? It's something that I don't have to explain to you, even if I haven't met you, because it's based on human needs. What you see here is a pyramid. It's called the Maslow's pyramid of needs. It's a theory, and it basically says that we all have basic needs at a human level, and for that reason, we get to connect with each other at that level. A universal truth is something that, for me, for example, for my girls, I needed to understand. What did I want to do with my story? Well, I wanted these girls to feel like they belonged at Microsoft, because I didn't feel like I belonged. Belonging, like you see here, is actually one of those needs. How does your story serve someone? What is that feeling? I don't have to explain to anyone here what belonging is. You just know. I don't know you, but you know, right? That's universal. That's a feeling. Love, disappointment, embarrassment, sadness, those are all feelings we all have experienced. We don't have to explain. That's universal. So start thinking about your brand differently. Start thinking about how it serves in the world differently. Then begin to define. So you empathize with yourself, with your audience, and you define your character in the story. Here you see a Robin, not a Batman. I decided that for my story was going to be about enabling people. I was not going to make the story about myself. I was going to make the story about those women. And so my story mission began to fill in differently. My audience had been defined. I was going to go tell the story to these women. So my mission now looks like this. I'm feminine and kind because my girls, not the world, they need reassurance that they belong. And that's done so that we can close the equality gap. There's less than 2% of us in tech. But if we leave, right, we don't represent. And so if I was going to leave Microsoft that day, I wouldn't have represented. It gets easier for me to just leave, but if I stayed, now I represent. We help pave that way for our daughters and our daughters' daughters. So I gave myself that purpose. Think about your story. Think about those moments that have served you, have happened to you, but have served you to encourage someone else, to give you purpose of some sort. You get to actually build this for yourself. Everyone has built their brand. You get to build those attributes. Think about what people say about you and how does that reflect on what you want to do. If it doesn't work, change it. Change it. It's yours. You get to aspire to a brand. And then you give yourself a story mission. So this is the brand mission. And then this is the story mission. My story is dedicated to those girls. Now, if I'm empathetic, I'm going to build a persona. I'm going to get into the demographic. I'm going to understand the psychographics. I'm going to learn where they are, where they live. I learned that they lived on Instagram. So I got myself an Instagram account. I didn't have one before, but I learned, right? I learned they liked a lot of content about relationships. So I started creating content about my own relationships, what happened to me in my relationships, right? So you begin to actually empathize with that audience. Now, how this replaces if your audience is like your target audience is a company, right? Like Microsoft. I want to go work at Microsoft. Okay, Microsoft is an entity. Just like everybody else was born, it has friends, it lives somewhere, it has core values. So when you treat it as a target as well, you get to understand its values, where it lives, what it does, its friends, its foes. And then you put it right there. My story is dedicated to Microsoft. Microsoft is this, it lives like this, its values are these. You see how that works? So it can help them do what? This is your value add. What are you going to bring to Microsoft, right? What are you going to bring to those girls? For me, it was really helping them with being there, with feeling like they belonged, right? And making them feel, again, that feeling is really important, making them feel like they belonged, that they were there for a purpose. So you give yourself a mission, you give your story a mission. And then you get to design the story, which is the fun part of storytelling, of branding. You begin to ideate. This is actually the phase of brainstorming, right? Okay, I've decided on my audience. I know how I show up. I'm going to change it. I'm going to go with this story or that story. Can I have 1,000 stories? You can have 10,000 stories. As long as this theme is the same, right? My theme was about belonging. My attributes are always the same, kind and feminine. If I can go with those main themes, I can tell 1,000 stories, right? And you should. There's many stories you can share. You get to choose. So here you find what I call Scamper. It's actually a brainstorming tool. You can brainstorm in so many ways. It's so fun. You can actually Google brainstorming tools. You'll find mind mapping. You'll find storyboarding. You'll find this Scamper. You'll find 6 thinking hats. This one I put as an example because it's one that I use a whole lot. Basically giving layers to your story. What if I replace the character? What if I no longer use the bullies in my story? I used that one man who brought me back. What if I introduce more about my parents in my story? What if I removed myself from the story and actually talk about other women who have experienced this and not just myself? So modifying the plot, eliminating something from the story. This is basically layers that you can add to shape your story. Use that piece of paper that I gave you, that you created with those data points, and plug them in. Put them in a 6-story panel and storyboard that story in only pictures without using words. You're going to have a lot of ways to actually storyboard and mind map and ideate stories. And then you're going to prototype your stories. You'll be like, okay, I have some ideas. Do I do a blog? Do I do an email? Do I do a video? Do I use my LinkedIn profile? Yeah, yes to all, depending on what you want to go do. These are prototypes. So that means they're models, quick, low cost, low effort models of how you're going to go out and tell the story. Here, you're going to find 8 basic concepts of storytelling. There are so many. And if it doesn't exist, you get to create yours, okay? Nobody is the storytelling guru. You get to own your own story. I'm going to just go quickly run through a few. There's one here in the middle. It's called in media res in Latin. It just basically means in the middle of things. It's when you start your storytelling with, my mother died when I was 5. Whoa, right? People are shocked. That was like right in the middle of things. And then you loop around to tell the rest of your story, right? Drama, right up here, it's called the mountain. If you're Latina like me, your stories live right there. Drama, 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 peak, drop. Lots of dramatic stories over here. At the bottom, you have a lion, a little lion. That's called the Lion King storytelling, or also the hero's journey storytelling. It's a story of transformation. We all have that. You can combine them. You can do a lot of things different ways. Just take them through a journey. Take people through a journey. Use your resume as a story. Say, hey, this is where I started. This is what happened. Instead of saying I'm a team player, say I value inclusion because I didn't have that growing up. Whoa, right? You can use your LinkedIn profile and talk about that because there's a lot of real estate there. In fact, I'll tell you that nobody's actually sharing resumes anymore. We can't because of privacy. And so when you share your resume, I can't share it with anybody, but you can share your LinkedIn profile. You can share your Instagram stories. You can share so many things today in a social format. And so use these ways to actually prototype stories. These are concepts of stories that you get to later test. Here is some tests that I've done. So I learned over the years, this is a long haul idea. I learned that my girls clearly love dogs. And so go on LinkedIn and talk about my dog's birthday, right? And you can be like, Miri, what is this? Why are you putting your dog on LinkedIn? Well, because I learned my audience. And by learning my audience, I got bold, I got courageous to tell stories that my audience wanted to see. Now, I have gotten a lot of hate from these type of stories, by the way. I've had people go, hey, Miri, why are you posting this on LinkedIn? This is not Facebook. And I'm like, well, thank you, Captain Obvious. This wasn't for you. Delete and block, right? Because that's not my audience. I have already learned and tested my audience. Now, notice, doesn't only have a picture of a dog, right? It has some content. Hey, pets can help humans with mental health, especially during COVID. So I've created a formula of my content by learning these prototypes. I've created content that has a formula of 3 ingredients. 1, the story is educational, insightful. It tells people something they may not know. Don't just share an article, right? When you brand yourself, everybody can read an article. You just tell me to read it. Share insights from your article. Say, hey, I read this article and I learned this, or I didn't like that. Add your opinion, your insights to that article, because we're all consuming content differently. We're all looking at the same page right now, the same slide, and consuming it in our minds differently. So we have insight that nobody else does. When you share it, people go, oh, I never seen it that way. You're right, right? That's insightful. Number 2, inspirational. People love to be inspired. So share content that is not only insightful, it's inspirational. And lastly, personal. The only thing that differentiates you in this content is that it comes from you, right? So I learned my girls love pictures. So I put a picture of myself, right? They love that. If I was talking to an IT pro, probably this wouldn't be the content I'm going to aim for, right? Because I've learned also as an audience that they like blogs specifically. They like bullet points, get to the point, tell me how to do it, and move on. So you learn your audiences and you grow your audience that way. I'm also on Twitter. I have a lot of people on Twitter. It's more of a professional IT pro audience, actually. And so I'm a little bit different on Twitter, right? I can let myself be a little more sarcastic. That's still part of me. So I get to be a little more witty because my younger audience, my girls are not there. And then on Instagram, clearly my girls live there. So I share a lot about my personal stuff, my travels, my family. This is stories and stories about just me, get to know me, so I can appear human. Again, I want to show up human. Your brand is human. Your brand is everything that you are. You're not just you're not just a professional. You're not just a student. You're a sister. You're a brother. You're a friend. You're so many layers of you that people want to get to know, and they will want to get to know because you're showing yourself. And then when you Google yourself, you'll probably have a panel, right? If you were to Google me back then, my postal address, people began to get curious. Who is this Miri? Why is Miri here? What is she doing? She's talking to a lot of people. And now people got curious, and that created a Google panel. It works because people want to understand more about you. People do want to know who you are because they want, in a story where you're telling me who you are, I also see myself as a human. I also see my triumphs and my failures, and I connect with you on a very human level. So you test it, right? You ask yourself, hey, did the story evoke the emotion that I wanted? Is my brand showing up the way that I want? If it's not, change it. Go back. It's a cycle. It's design thinking. It's a prototype, right? So you go back and you're like, hey, maybe I should change something. Maybe I should position it better. Maybe I should use a photo instead of a video. You test it. And the more you test it, the more you learn your audience. And the more you learn yourself, by the way. You're going to go out there, you're going to test it. And don't be afraid. I know it's just a little bit scary, but just get bold with it because nobody else can do this for you. Nobody else. No one's going to go out there and talk about your accomplishments. Nobody. Not your boss, not your mom, not your sister, not your brother. You are the only person who can do that. Well, Miri, that sounds nice, but I don't want to show up like I am, I'm boasting. You don't have to. You can actually talk about your accomplishments and say, hey, I want to thank my professor because he taught me this and now I was able to accomplish this. You actually show up and talk about the other characters in your story that helped you get there. Same with failures. Hey, I failed. I learned this lesson. This is what happened. People show up and go, wow, me too, right? And so you get to brand yourself in a way that is emotional and connects with people. And that's it. Just remember, your origin story is the one thing that will differentiate you in the market. And stories are for your audience, not to them. They have to be authentic. The one thing that makes them authentic is you. They have to be empathetic. You got to empathize with yourself. You got to learn yourself. You got to learn how to brand yourself and what your audience needs. Empathize with your audience. Target that audience. Ideate as much as you can every time. Your story never ends. It's part of who you are. It continues to grow and evolve. You're going to add more stories. You're going to add more data points. You're going to learn your audience more and more. And finally, do it with heart. Do it with heart because it's the one thing that comes from you. Nobody else can tell the story passionately, only you. Authenticity comes from the heart. Authenticity comes from who you are and how you let yourself be. And that's it. Let's take some questions now. Well, you can connect with me as well. Here's my contact information if we don't get through all the questions yet. All right.
Hey, Miri, question from this side.
Yes.
Getting my voice?
Yeah, yes, Mridul, we can hear your voice.
Yeah. I want to ask you a thing. You said all those things about empathy, right?
Yes.
That means relating feelings to others. There is a bigger world out there. 99% chances are wherever you go out, you'll meet a complete strange person. And wherever you, how will you relate your emotions to him? And how will you know the background of the person you're interacting to?
Yeah. So you will know immediately because when your story is emotional, people react, right? So think about a movie, a book, a piece of poetry, a song that became emotional for you. It's just content, but it's content with emotion. And so you react. So you will know because people will either react or not to it. I have tested many stories, and when the moment they react, it is immediate. People will immediately grab, it will grab their attention. They're strangers, yes, but they're human. So the universal truth is if you go out with an emotion that people understand, no matter who they are as a stranger, they can connect to that story. If I talk about something sad, people can understand sadness. So they'll connect on that level. And that's why you have to be careful and be crafty and design the story in a way that people can connect no matter where they come from.
Okay, so Miri, we have a question for you in the chat box.
Okay.
So the question is, how would you overcome imposter syndrome?
Yes. I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to actually put into the chat it's called the imposter syndrome banishing spell from my very good friend and colleague Dana Sarkar. Dana is a principal manager at Microsoft, and she did actually a tech talk, which I love so much, about imposter syndrome. I think it's the best way to really tackle this whole thing. The easy way really is to understand that everyone at one point feels like you're not good enough. I go through imposter syndrome all day long. I just wrote a book and I'm like, oh my gosh, will people like it? Am I good enough to write it? It really is a consistent battle with myself. But here's my own reasoning behind getting rid of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is your own insecurities of, am I good enough? You're good enough because your story is good enough to be shared. Once you get bold enough to share it and you know that people will tune in, people do tune in. Once it's out there and you can see the response. So it's really a bold move of telling imposter syndrome to shut up and be like, you know what, I'm going to just go do this for the purpose that I have. When you create your purpose, you kind of move away from yourself and your own fears and go boldly to do this. But watch this TED Talk. It's really great. And I think it's going to give you some steps to tackle imposter syndrome.
Hi.
All right.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a question. Say you're not as popular and as popular as you are right now. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
you're in the phase where you're building your brand. You're still building
Yep.
your story. Even then,
Yep.
I mean, that phase as well, you got to approach companies and develop yourself. So when you're in that kind of phase, how do you show your brand? How do you portray your story to them when
Yeah.
you're in
So
that phase?
absolutely. So I wasn't, right. I had to start somewhere. I built this over the years. It started somewhere. So again, start with your target audience. You're not going to, target everyone, and you shouldn't, because if you do that, you don't know how to present yourself. You're just kind of shooting blanks. So you target an audience. And if you're doing this, if you're branding yourself to, like, if your goal is to get a job, definitely you're targeting entities, you're targeting organizations. If your job is, if your goal is to connect with other people, to brand yourself holistically as a person, like for me, it was holistic. I just wasn't about the job. The job came later. And by the way, I found out that if I targeted myself a certain way, people begin to actually come to me and say, hey, do you want to work with us? Because people noticed who I was, my personality, my stories. I was already putting myself out there. They didn't have to interview me. I was already talking about my passions. I was already talking about my core values. So a great way to start is to think about your core values. What are those? For us in my family, we created a family 5 core values that are ours, not just what my mom and dad taught me, or religion, or culture, or society. These are my personal values that I go out and do business with and do relationships with. So create those set of values for you. For me, for us, it's a family 5. It's love God. It's family first, always tell the truth, be courageous, work hard, right? So we go out with those, we talk about those, we share those. And so for you, what are those core values that you can start talking about? Those values you can use in story form. Like for me, it's like work hard. Why is that a core value? Well, because I had to work really hard. Sometimes I had 3 jobs, right? Because I couldn't afford things in my life. I was poor. So we had a work ethic that really enabled us. Just so you have stories to tell for your core values. You decide your audience and just get started with that, and people will tune in.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the next question we have is, suppose if we know the person, what if that person is like a closed book? How to connect with people like that?
So if you know the person, what's the other part of the question?
How to connect with people like that? If that person is like a closed book,
Okay. So
so how to connect with?
yeah. So, again, you are using your story as a gift. Content is a gift. So you can't worry so much about them more than what your story is about to do. So you set an intention for your story. Hey, the story is going to go to this target. They may be a closed book, but I'm going to consistently share the story until it gets to them. It's actually what I did with my audience. My audience was a very closed book. They were very afraid to speak up. They were very afraid to say something, especially because they were starting in their own career. And they thought, if I say something against my manager or against someone who's bullying me, I'm going to get, retaliated upon. It's going to hurt my career. I was already mid-career at that level. So I needed to make them feel comfortable. And so I opened up with my story, and I allowed them to respond in the way they wanted to. So first they started responding privately. Hey, Miri, this happened to me too. I just can't share it. Okay, that's respectful. But I knew it was getting to them, right? People began to connect. Then people got bold. Hey, Miri, you inspire me to get out there and tell my story. Can you help me? Absolutely. So again, you don't control how people will perceive the story. You control what you are sending to them and the intention you're setting. So don't worry so much about them. Worry about how you're landing it, and start being very consistent with sharing it over and over until you get that response.
Okay. So another question we have is, how important is it to focus on your competitors?
On your competitors? Oh gosh, no. Do not focus on your competitors. That will be a waste of time. Listen, there will always be someone smarter, shorter, taller, prettier, more followers, popular, someone better. I don't know. There will always be someone that we perceive is better than us. That is imposter syndrome at its best, talking to you, talking down to you. Be in competition with yourself. Be the best version of you day by day. Look back and go, am I better than yesterday? And then tomorrow, am I better than yesterday? And really hone in on your best attributes. This is why branding is really important. You go out and say, I'm going to go do this and be this. I'm aspiring to be kind. Am I kind all the time? No, I try. But I'm not focused on other people. I am not focused on what anybody else is doing. I'm just being myself. That is the authentic me. If I try to be something else or someone else, I'm not going to be me. So that's not authentic.
Okay. So Ari, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Right?
Okay.
They can post it as
So
well.
no issues, no issues. So I'll just read it. Okay. So when we put our feelings out to a stranger, at times we get dragged with emotions. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, that is very true. And that happens to me a lot. So you test the story first. Remember, I said be empathetic to yourself. You get to decide which stories you're going to tell and why. So when I've decided to tell stories that are very sad or very, where I'm reliving those stories and really emotional, I have to ask myself why I want to share that story and how will it impact my audience. If I share stories of disappointment, of stories of people that have hurt me, I relive that story first, right? I craft it. And so reliving that story, I go, well, is this going to impact and why? What is the lesson learned? So if you see my content on LinkedIn and I share my own stories, I've already gone through the exercise a couple of times to really test myself into why I'm choosing to share that story. I have been connected to people who say, Miri, I have a story of physical abuse or sexual abuse. Should I share that story? My answer back to them is, should you share the story? What are you trying to teach people and who with that story? So it's not just go out there and tell your story for no reason. Again, give your story a mission and ask yourself, why would I want to share this very personal story? And if you have a really good conviction about it because you know it has a lesson learned, you know it's going to connect someone it's going to connect with someone who's gone through something similar, then you put yourself out there.
Okay, so the next question we have is, you talked about being authentic in your story and also about ideating, but don't you think we will be missing out on spontaneity and authenticity if we ideate too much?
Yeah, so there's a combination, right, of authenticity, of spontaneity. So there are some stories that are very calculated. There are other stories for me that I've allowed myself, once I've branded myself, I know myself enough to be like, oh, I can go just tell a story and go live right now, right? So that's part of the process. You will have different types of content. You will have types of content where you've spent time crafting it. You will have times that you would have learned your audience enough to say, hey, I thought of this, I'm just going to post. So I do both, right? Especially on LinkedIn, I typically post on Sundays. That's my day to actually craft a story. But in between that, if something comes to my mind, if I had something that came across, if I lived an experience, I just go out there and share it, right? Because I've already learned the language, the type of story, the visuals that my audience wants. So that is part of the process. You learn the audience and you learn if they like what they like and what is the best time to do it. So it's really up to you, and you get to do both. You get to craft a very designed story. Once you learn the elements, you go with whatever. So again, asking yourself, what are those attributes? Is my story kind and feminine? If the answer is yes, go with it, right? So I'm already keeping the theme. I'm being consistent with who I am. Doesn't matter the format.
Okay, so the next question we have, we meet people who are not known to us. How we can introduce ourselves with them for the very first time?
Yeah, you say hi and you introduce yourself. That's exactly what we do with strangers all the time, right? Where you introduce yourself in the story that you want first. So who are these strangers? Are they people that you're targeting? There's many strangers out there. I don't go out there and introduce myself to IT pros. That's not my audience. That's part of my audience because of the work that I do. But my target audience is these young girls. So I've learned the language. I've learned to introduce myself over and over and say, hi, I'm Miri, and this is what I do, or this is what I'm about. So it again goes back to your audience. Who are these strangers? They may look like strangers, but if they're targeted audience, they're not strangers to you. You learned about them. You learn where they are. You learn where they live. You are taking time to research and be empathetic. So you have a pretty good idea about what they are about, even if you don't know them individually. I know my girls very well. I know what content they're going to love or hate. I know how to get to them. I know what to post on Instagram because I've learned what works and doesn't. So even though they are strangers, I'm still targeting them, and it targets well. Think about people who have targeted you in their content, and even though you're a stranger to them, it feels like they're connected to you personally. That's because they've done that. They've actually learned about their audience and learned what they like and they don't like. So it's really taking time to be empathetic with your audience.
Hi, Miri. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask, you talked about judging your audience before pitching your story, right? So that requires a lot of experience in judging your crowd. And what if you tell people your story and you misjudge them, and then you don't provoke the feelings that you wanted to provoke?
Yeah.
What?
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Okay. Thank you for your question. So yeah, I like the word learning your audience more because it's an exercise that continues to be. So judging comes more from your own opinion of what that audience is. Learning comes from an unbiased place of what the internet, what the research is telling you about this audience, not your own opinion of that audience. Learning your audience is a continuous exercise. My girls have evolved so much in the last 8 years. The things that worked for them back then don't work for them. Some still do, some others don't. So I've had to evolve myself to continue being relevant to that audience. So if it doesn't work specifically to that audience, that means that you are not targeting them the best way, even though you've learned some things about them. So you have to go back to that cycle of design thinking. You have to go back to the storytelling piece of ideation and prototyping and saying, okay, I tried the story this way, I landed it, went flat, didn't work. Let me try it another way, right? So I've learned from my audience a couple of things. The stories my audience particularly likes are stories of immediate, happenstance. Like something happened to me and I went out and talked about it immediately. They love that. So I post those stories. They don't feel like I've been crafting them for a long time. Once upon a time, it's like, hey, I just came back up from the bank and this happened to me at the bank, and they're like, oh my gosh. So they like lived experience stories is what they like. So you begin to learn. If it falls flat, that's a data point. That's something that you have to go back and go, okay, didn't work. What's next? Let me try something again. Let me replace a character. Let me angle it different. Let me put a picture on it. Let me put a video on it. And you begin to learn what your audience wants. So again, really, it is an entire process of design thinking. It's a prototype, so it's a low cost, low effort, right? You're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. You're going to design it, throw it out there, see if it works, and your audience kind of guides you. It doesn't work? Okay, let me go this way. Okay, they like it. Let me go continue this way. Okay, they like that one. Okay, let me go that way. So you begin to kind of feel the audience because they're telling you what they like or don't like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so the next question we have is, when you ask people opinions about yourself, how did you find out of what you actually wanted and who you truly are apart from people's opinion about you?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So when I did this exercise, I just asked everyone, and I found out I had a lot of haters. A lot of people didn't like me. I mean, people were like, you show up loud, you show up this, and I was like, whoa, I had no idea I showed up like that. I was completely unaware. Some people were kind. Some people were like, well, Miri, you show up very colorful, very flavorful. Whatever. I was called a prima donna. I was called so many different things. So the first thing is make sure these people you're asking this question to, as I said at the beginning, are people you trust, are people want to see you win, are people that care for your success. That's really important because you're going to walk out of that exercise a little bit beat up from what you thought you were and what people really think you are. But it's a good telling. It's a good feedback. So you show up and go, okay, what do I do next with this information? What you do is you look at those attributes and say, which ones do I leverage? Which ones do I leave aside? Which ones do I modify? Which ones do I elevate? As I said, for me, I took those two big ones, sarcasm and feminist, and I decided to change them and use those as my my big attributes. So really, this exercise is going to be a little bit of a beat up, but a really good one as a baseline. Use people that care for you, and don't see this as a negative. These attributes are not negatives. These are just how people see you. Then you take that and you choose your aspirational attributes. You say, okay, with this information, now I want to show up like this. I'm going to intend to show up this way. Okay, and so yeah, so then you set the intention to how you want to show up based on your audience. Once you've studied your audience, you say, okay, for example, if I'm going to target CEOs of a company, clearly I can't show up quiet, I can't show up shy. So I'm going to ump my attributes and say, okay, I need to show up boldly, I need to show up with a voice. So that really, again, all depends on your audience.
Yeah, I think that's answer this question. So the next, Miri, we have a couple of questions left for you. Okay, so what is the role of language in all your career?
What is the role of language?
In all your career.
Can you reframe that question so I make sure I get it?
Might be he's asking about what's the role of mainstream language in the, for example, the person who's asking the question is not from the who has a English native. Okay, so he's asking about that.
Okay, so you're a foreign language, basically, how you show up as a foreigner or use your origin language in your career. For me, at first, I came from Venezuela. I really tried my best to work on my English. I didn't want to show up, with an accent. I thought that I had to Americanize myself. I later learned that my accent actually helps people understand and recognize me as an immigrant, something that at first I thought for me would make me feel as a disadvantage, but later on it actually became my advantage. When I talk to these young girls, I realized that being an immigrant helped me show vulnerable to them. And so that vulnerability also, no matter where they come from, I already had a point that I showed up as someone that they could relate to. It's relatable. So language is important as you make it. What does the story of your language say? Does it say where you come from? Do you want to show up where you come from? Why do you want to show up where you come from? Is it important in your story to your audience? If it isn't important and if it doesn't make any difference, don't add it in. Just show up and be who you are. And your audience, again, will learn from you who you are because you're letting yourself be known in different facets. If it's something that you want to really showcase, hey, I came from this place. I often say I come from the slums. That's important. That's an important data point for me to tell people because I'm relating to my audience. So language and where you come from and your origin, how much of that you want to show up is really depending on your audience.
Okay, so the next question we have is, what piece of suggestion do you have for interns? How should they showcase themselves in front of recruiters?
Yes, that's a great question. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to share with you for interns, internships, that if you want to show up the best way, your story, and differentiate yourself in the market will really work. So the first thing is LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn profile, you have a lot of different real estate there that you will not have on a resume. A resume is a more formal piece of document. Your LinkedIn profile is not. In fact, it's been really relaxed lately in the format of a social network. You can go out there and highlight many different things about yourself. You can include all your honors, your accolades. You can include some, things you've actually done out there by using the featured content. So there's so many different avenues that you can use in this one this piece of real estate. So the first thing is, once you've done your exercise of who you are and done that mission statement, you can actually use those attributes to label yourself in a way that captures people's attention. You're going to target, right? To you, recruiters is your target audience. Learn recruiters. Learn what they like and don't like. Don't go out there and just send your resume. Recruiters do not like that. If you didn't know that, I'm going to tell you right now. Recruiters don't like you sending them your resume. They're not going to look at it. They can't open it up because they have another 1,000 things to do. So don't do that, right? So learn what they like and don't like. Recruiters are always talking about this. Go on and find out, Google what recruiters like and don't like. You'll find out as an audience. So learn that. And also insert yourself in a way that captures their attention from your angle. Again, you're learning how to best position your story in front of them. If they become your target audience, where do they live? What do they talk about? What is important to them? What is not important to them? use your story in a way where you're actually labeling your attributes differently. Instead of saying I'm a team player, say, hey, I value inclusion because I have a story of not being included. That's it. People are going to go, ooh, I want to learn more. What is this about? That's a value of yours. So again, play up the story in a way that you've lived an experience. You want to talk about your experience, and also you create the values that are set with the company's values. For example, at Microsoft, we value empowerment. Empowerment is very important for me as a woman, right? So I talk about empowerment. And I talk about, wow, I would love to work at Microsoft because I value empowerment as a woman, and Microsoft values empowerment as a woman. That's a core value that I align to. So now you're getting in front of them and going, wow, this person belongs culturally in our company. We are aligning values. Again, you look at the recruiter and the company as a target audience, as an entity, and they have core values that you want to play up.
Okay, so the next question is the next question is really about changing the perception. Okay, so your audience already have an opinion about you that you didn't want them to have. Okay, so how you can change it? So it's about it.
Yeah. So have you seen, for example, politicians that people talk about all the time, have a perception, and then they go out and talk about it like, that's not true, or that's not me. They just do it, right? They just continue to consistently talk about who they are. And eventually people talk about who they are, because it is your job to change that perception. It is your job to show up differently. I had mixed attributes. A lot of people had a mostly negative perception about me. I was like, I showed up, I was unaware, right? I showed up, like a prima donna. I showed up so many other things that people were saying I was. And I was like, wow, I really didn't realize that's how I showed up. I don't want people to think that of me. So I began to brand myself. I looked at kindness as an attribute, and I said, okay, I'm going to talk about kindness. I'm going to talk about my journey with kindness. I'm going to talk about what it is to be kind. And most recently, I actually got named a kindness warrior. That's from years of me talking about kindness. So people will perceive what you're saying when you show up consistently under those attributes. That's why it's very important that you actually draw that line and say, this is how I'm going to show up. You counter effect what people are thinking and getting in their minds and saying, no, that's actually your perception. Let me tell you who I really am. Let me tell you what I'm really about. Let me tell you what I am about. That's why storytelling works, because you get in front of them and you say, I know you were thinking this, but this is really truly my story.
Okay, so the next question we have, how to deal with people who are very close to you, but sometimes with their actions, they disappoint you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first question I'd like to ask is, how important are these people to you? Because some people who are close to you could be your sister, your brother, just because they're family. And how do they play up in your story, and how important are they? If they're very important to you, and they have a perception they disappoint you, clearly you want to restore the relationship. Clearly you want to talk about it. You want to hear their opinion empathetically. Think about why they disappointed you, what happened, why they chose that action. It's important to understand their side, because in every story there's another side of the story if there's someone else involved. It's not just your own story. So think about the other character, what happened in their side, and try to understand it. If it's people who seem close to you, but they really aren't, I mean, I've gone through a lot of phases where I've thought that I had a lot of friends and they weren't really friends. So people that may look like they're close to you and they actually make a choice to hurt you or to not be kind to you because they don't care, reevaluate your relationship. How important are they in your life? I have had to make decisions to get rid of people in my life, to cut relationships, because I realized they were not good for me. So truly, again, they're part of your story. These characters are part of your story. How you make them part of your story is up to you. It is your life. You are the CEO of your life. You get to choose people that do life with you. So you get to evaluate it. You get to either mend the relationship if you want, even when they disappoint you, or you get to say, you disappointed me 10 times already. You're no good for me. Goodbye. It's really up to you.
Hello, Miri.
Hi.
So my question is really simple. Can you offer an example of a universal lesson anyone can apply? Because everyone is different. So simple perception anyone can apply. apply? Thank
Yes,
you.
absolutely, SM. Belonging is the example that I've been giving a whole lot. I will talk about empowerment from Microsoft. So I'll give the example very pointedly. Microsoft's, the mission of the brand before Satya, our CEO, came on board, the mission was to put a PC on every desk in every home, right? And then Satya came on board and he said, we're going to change our mission, our brand mission, just like I told you to have a brand mission. As an entity, our mission is gonna be to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. If you notice that mission, it has those three elements that I talked about. To empower, so that the story was dedicated to every person and organization on the planet. To help them what? Achieve more. To make them feel empowered. The feeling, the universal feeling is empowerment. We all know what it is to feel empowered or not. Right? We all know that. So that's universal. It doesn't matter who our customers were. We have customers who are 12-year-old Xbox players. We have customers who are 50-year-old IT pros. But empowerment may look differently to them, but the word empowerment resonates with everyone. So that is a universal truth.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're welcome.
So the next question is something which I also want to ask about. Okay. So sharing stories is a very good thing. Okay. So how can we draw a line between oversharing and communicating my story effectively? Okay. Because we have seen people not appreciating when we overshare a lot. Okay.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't know that that's true, that people don't appreciate when you overshare. We are learning from various sources that a lot of generations, newer generations, actually want to learn. They want that knowledge sharing. It depends how much you share and what you share. What people don't like is not oversharing. What they don't like is sharing the same thing over and over. So you have to reinvent yourself and be careful to craft your stories and what you're sharing differently every single time. Also think about the channels. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, if you follow me on Twitter, and if you follow me on Instagram, my stories will be completely different. So I'm sharing a whole lot, but I'm sharing different stories or different angles of the same story based on my audience. So I would be careful to say it's not about oversharing. It's more about what you're sharing. Again, the formula that has worked for me consistently, I've had a lot of content go viral, and I've gotten it to go viral because I've learned what it is. The content needs to be insightful. It needs to be inspired or inspirational, and it needs to be personal. Those three elements will never go wrong with your story if you use those attributes, because people want to be inspired, people want to learn, and people want you to be authentic with your story, so it's personal. So if you use that, if it's not working, it's because you did something else that you need to go back and look at in the cycle of ideation. But it's not about oversharing.
Okay, so next question we have from Bhavna. She says that how to get confident, how to get confidence when we need to express in front of a large crowd. What could really boost their confidence?
That's a great question. So, again, I didn't start talking to a lot of people. I now speak on stages with thousands of people around the world. Clearly, I started somewhere, and I started, with just a small group of people. What makes me confident is knowing and reminding myself of that cognitive empathy. It's from human to human. So whether it's one person in front of me or 1,000 people in front of me, it feels like one. It feels like I'm talking to one, because I am. To them, I'm talking to them. It's a one-on-one transaction. So I move away from, wow, there's a lot of people. Whoa, there's a lot of CEOs in this room, to it's from Miri, a human, to another human. I kind of bring that back down to that cognitive empathy, and that enables me to talk to them one-on-one. I actually, when I wrote my book, I struggled with that. I was like, whoa, my audience is a very smart audience. They're probably not going to even want to read the book because they're already too smart. I'm not teaching them anything. And I was like, wait a minute, let me get away from myself, tell imposter syndrome to shut up, and just talk to them from my heart, one-on-one. So if you read the book, it feels like it's just one-on-one, even though it's one-to-many. So really is the cognitive empathy. Practice that. And the more you practice it, the more you move away from, this zooming relationship of like, oh, it's a lot of people, or that's very important people. We're all human.
Okay, so we have the last two questions for you. Okay.
Yes.
So are you fine with it? Yeah. Miri, will you be taking the questions?
Sorry,
have
I
just, will you be taking questions? Just two more questions we have.
yes, two more questions. Let's go.
Okay. So many a times there's a huge fear of being out there, being visible, the fear of people judging or
Mhm.
commenting. Okay.
Yeah,
So even something as simple as asking a question gets very intimidating and
yeah.
scary. How to get over that fear of feeling of being judged? Okay.
Yes, 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 yes. So I'll tell you something. First, I'll confess that you never really move away from the fear of being judged. There's always a little voice in your head, that imposter syndrome idea that, man, I'm going to throw this story, this content out there and somebody's not going to like it. But what you do work with is your own courage of why you're sharing that story, the purpose. So that enables you to empower yourself to say, I'm going to, even though, so to me, being fearless, it's not the absence of having fears. It's actually being courageous enough to move forward, even with your fears. And that's why it's important, because you give yourself a mission. For me, when I go out there and I throw a story, I'm like, I'm going to go throw the story. Once it's out there, it's out there. But why am I doing it? Well, because I've learned that more positive comes out of it. More people are impacted positively than negatively. And then I evaluate people that are giving me those negative comments. I get a lot of hate on social media. A lot of people take their time to go out there and hate on my content. What do? If they're my audience and the story didn't land well, I evaluate because they're my audience. I'm like, okay, they're giving me feedback. I need to reevaluate my content. I need to talk to them and be authentic about why the content didn't land well, or why it didn't it didn't express what I wanted it to express. How, as a communicator, as a storyteller, what did I fail? Where did I fail? And that's a learning lesson. If the story didn't land with somebody else who's not my audience, they're not my audience. I couldn't care less what they say. So I block them. I delete them. I tell them, why you're stopping by? Like, thanks for stopping by. Your comment is irrelevant for me. You're not my audience. This wasn't for you, right? So I empower myself to say, if you're not my audience, I couldn't care less what you say. Delete and block are my best friends.
Okay. So in your opinion, what is the best way to heal yourself whenever you get pain in your life, either professional or a personal one?
Yeah. I it's with compassionate empathy. I have had to learn to look at my emotions, to reflect on what I'm feeling, not necessarily do anything with it, just kind of look at them and talk about them for myself, have that self-talk. Okay, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, I'm feeling disappointment, I'm hurt, I have a broken heart today. Why is this important to me? And acknowledge it. That exercise alone, just doing nothing, just looking at my feelings, helps me understand myself more. And that usually leads to its own resolution. Once you start reflecting, you understand why it hurt so much, or why the failure was so big in your heart. Often it leads to a humbling experience of you learning yourself and why that's important or not to you. So it's more about reflection of those feelings and connection with yourself than actually doing something about it. And that leads to understanding more of yourself. That's also a data point in your origin story, right? You're going to remember that moment. What can you learn when you go back to that moment? What was the lesson from that moment to yourself? So that actually serves as another story that might become a story later on. I'm personally going through something right now, and it's tough. I've had to really reflect a whole lot on this process that I'm personally in at this moment. But when I share with my friends very intimately this story that's happening, this moment, they all said immediately, Miri, we know you're going to go tell that story later on, right? They already know that I'm going to, once I have removed myself emotionally from the story, I've acknowledged my emotions, then I walk away from the emotions and look at the process and go, wow, I learned so much. All of this I learned. And later on, I'm going to go talk about those learnings. So it's a process and it never ends. We never, we're broken people. We are humans. That's the human condition. So learning those moments really helps you tell the next stories and become the best stories. Broken-hearted stories are the best stories.
Yeah. So that's the last question for the session we have. So
Okay.
how does one recover from something which he has put a lot of effort in it, but hasn't received the expected level of appreciation or something else? Okay, the outcome.
Yeah, that's once again, don't do a whole lot of that. The effort really needs to be at the beginning of learning your audience. The most of your effort needs to be on empathy, the first step, and defining. After that, it's prototyping, right? Prototyping is low cost, low effort. You can't go out there and do a huge production and then it doesn't land and you're like, oh my gosh, this is wasted time. It's really small things that you're doing, snippets of the stories that you're testing out in the market, right? I didn't start big, and I actually don't do big at all because my audience doesn't like big. But I started with, I'm gonna go share this one story and see what happens. And people began to send me inbox messages. Whoa, Miri, thanks for sharing. I'd like to learn more. People got curious. So again, don't go out and put all this effort. The real effort really needs to be about learning yourself and learning your audience. Once you learn those two key things empathetically, you can go out and do a whole lot with that.
Okay, so thank you so much, Miri, for answering each and every question. Okay, so that was a wonderful session. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and stay safe and stay at home. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you everyone for having me. If you have more questions, you can also go on Instagram and ask me, and I'll do some stories there and answer those questions as well.
Definitely. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Yes. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Thank you.